combat operations continue at this time in full force, and they will continue until all of our objectives are achieved.
Middle East on edge. U.S. President Donald Trump says attacks on Iran will continue as he calls on the nation's leaders to capitulate. Iran now says it will not negotiate with the U.S. We have full coverage here on Horizon's Middle East and Africa, including panels on energy, aviation, as well as how hedge funds and banks in the region are responding to threats. We will start in Beirut with Freddy Khoueiry, Global Security Analyst at MENA at RANE. And for more on the market reaction to the widening conflict in the region, Deepak Mehra, Chief Economist at Commercial Bank of Dubai, joins us live. And of course, as oil spikes, the crisis effectively shuts the Strait of Hormuz, sending Brent up as much as 13% at one point in the biggest jump in 4 years. We will be speaking to Sara Vakhshouri, President and founder of SVB Energy International, on what is at stake. Good morning, everybody. This is Horizon's Middle East and Africa. It has just gone 9 a.m. across the Emirates. I'm Joanna Versace, live from Dubai. What a weekend it has been. I'm going to take you straight to the market price action. Throughout the course of this show, we're going to be talking about the political, economic, financial implications of everything that has gone down over the course of this weekend. This is where S&P futures are starting up. We are pointed to a negative open, down 0.8% in reaction to the setup, of course, geopolitically. But then also, I should mention that anyway, to begin with, Wall Street was struggling towards the end of the week last week. We saw a close in the red as those AI fears have not subsided. So the setup was pretty negative going into the weekend to begin with. 10-year yields, we're seeing below 4% today. 3.96 is where we are. Some money going into the traditional safe havens. I don't have the dollar here, but the dollar also bid this morning. 10-year treasuries, dollar, and of course gold shown at the bottom there, up 1.4% this morning. So given the uncertainty in the air, no surprise that those quote-unquote safe havens are doing quite well. And of course, everyone was waiting to see how oil was going to open up this morning. At one point, we did open up 13% higher. We've pulled back now about half of that, and it is up still 6%. Brent sitting at $77. Will it stay at those levels? Big question. We will put it to our experts later in the show. Switching over, I also just want to remind viewers that local markets in Dubai and Abu Dhabi are shut for the next couple of days, given the developments over the weekend. That was an announcement that came through from the Capital Markets Authority. But the Tadawul, the Saudi index, was open yesterday. It closed down 2%. And you can see this is a 2-day chart, but I wanted to show it just to show to you on the open how much the Tadawul initially dropped. Interestingly enough, Aramco, which viewers will be familiar with, was up 3% in trading yesterday. So a key beneficiary of some of the more positive price action in oil. And I will just say also anecdotally, we are hearing a few explosions go off. So stay with us throughout the course of this show. We'll bring you more developments also from the UAE as well. Now, U.S. President Donald Trump says the bombing campaign against Iran will continue until its objectives are achieved. Trump has reconfirmed the death of Iran's supreme leader, the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and said the U.S. and Israel had struck hundreds of targets in Iran, including Revolutionary Guard facilities and air defenses. The conflict has spread across the Middle East, with Iran sending missiles at targets in multiple countries in the region, including Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, as well as Iraq. Trump also told ABC the U.S. had identified possible candidates to take over Iran, but they were killed in the initial attack. Let's now bring in Stuart Livingstone-Wallace, Bloomberg's executive editor for Middle East, North Africa and Russia. And joining us from Jerusalem as well as Bloomberg's Dan Williams. Stuart, I'm going to start with you. Look, just at the top of the show, both you and I also heard some blasts going on in the background. And I will say this has been a feature of the weekend. All of residents in Dubai have been exposed to those types of explosions, blasts. It is fair to say that what started off as Iran-US-Israel conflict has now expanded into a regional conflict.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So I think the most recent one we had was Oman being attacked for the first time yesterday by our calculations, that's now 10 countries that are simultaneously under attack one way or another across the region, and it's really spreading basically all the way from Israel right across down into the Gulf. Now, it's of different intensity in different places, but it is spreading, there's no doubt. You had the first attacks on maritime operations yesterday, and simultaneously, you've got cargo ships being stopped, the operations at Jebel Ali are suspended. Yeah. So it's having a very, very serious impact.
Let me turn to Dan now, because both President Trump and the Israeli Prime Minister in the last 24 hours have indicated that the campaign is not going to stop, the aerial campaign is not going to stop. And if anything, I believe the Israeli Prime Minister said that actions are going to be amplified, intensified over the coming days. Dan, who or what is the objective now that the Supreme Leader has been killed alongside other key personnel?
Well, to judge from Trump's opening statement shortly after this campaign began, I think the objective is to bring the Iranian opposition, the Iranian populace, out of its hiding places into the streets to take over the country. You'll recall that Trump told, instructed, advised Iranians to stay at home and in safety while those bombs were falling everywhere. Those were his words, more or less. If indeed the Israelis and the Americans feel they have exhausted at least the major target set for their attack when it comes to regime figures, when it comes to major threats from the missile array that the Iranians have, air defenses, potentially even their nuclear capacity, then I think we'll expect perhaps even today or in the near future, messaging toward the Iranians indicating that it is now safe for them to come out and confront what remains of the state's security forces that bloodily crack down on them. Forgive me, I have to stop. There are missiles coming in. Those are sirens. I'm going to take shelter and wish you well. Speak soon. Bye-bye.
Dan, please stay safe. Your safety is of utmost importance to us. Stuart, let me come back to you because, as we're speaking, Dan is rushing to safety. We just heard explosions a couple of minutes ago over here. Where does the potential off-ramp or de-escalation come from?
So in terms of what we've heard, which is not necessarily an indication of what will actually happen, but obviously President Trump says he's anticipating up to 4 or 5 weeks of this campaign carrying on. Simultaneously, he said he's got, 2-3 successors in mind for the Supreme Leader, but then came out a little while after that and said, well, actually, no, they're all dead, so we don't really have anyone. At the same time, you've got reports that the Iranians are reaching out to resume negotiations. But again, a couple of hours later, the Iranian security chief comes out and says, no, we're not. So it's very hard to see where exactly the exit is here. I mean, I think clearly a big part of this will be the Gulf Arab nations. Mm-hmm. They are the ones, in some respects, that are facing an unprecedented scenario and are going to be pushing, I think, very, very hard for some sort of resolution.
What do you make of the Gulf states' reaction over the course of the weekend and the fact that, this morning or yesterday evening, the UAE suspended its diplomatic operations in Tehran, very strong words also being directed from Saudi Arabia to the Iranians. How should we read this reaction?
So, I think they were quite surprised in some respects about the response that we had from Iran, or rather the intensity and how widespread it is, because they had gone out of their way in the run-up to this to make it clear that they weren't going to allow their territory to be used for any attacks on Iran. So I think to some extent they were hoping they would be insulated of sorts. But in terms of the rhetoric, particularly coming out of Riyadh, some incredibly strong statements. So we're going to see what's happening over the next few days and weeks. But it's clear that while they have been incredibly successful about repelling the attacks that have come in, I think the success rate here is 90+%. At the same time, they know that this is not good for the economy, it's not good for prosperity, and it needs to end soon.
Yeah, and let me just ask you, within Iran now, we're going to talk more about this with our Iranian-focused correspondent Patrick Sykes, but is there a sense that actually people are going to take to the streets now and use this window of opportunity, vulnerability of the regime to protest in more full force?
It's very hard to say. So we've had very conflicting images coming out of Iran, particularly after the death of Khamenei. You had a bunch of videos showing, mourning in places like Tehran for his death. On the other hand, you've seen plenty of social videos of people celebrating his death. And it's very hard to see what the trajectory is. Remember that they were out on the streets protesting maybe only a month ago, and you saw the reaction from the authorities at that time. You know, it was an incredibly vicious crackdown on them. So I think there will be a reluctance there to repeat that. But again, look, we'll see.
Stuart, thank you so much. Stuart Livingstone-Wallace, Bloomberg's executive editor for Middle East, North Africa and Russia, and Bloomberg's Dan Williams, who was with us in Jerusalem. Dan had to take shelter after sirens went off in Jerusalem. And also just a reminder that this is still very much live. We're hearing that Bahrain is also sounding sirens right now. And as I was just reporting ourselves, we just heard here in Dubai blasts go off. And reportedly residents in Abu Dhabi also hearing blasts as well. Let's continue the conversation now with Freddy Khoueiry, global security analyst MENA at RANE, who joins us from Beirut, which is also another front that is opening up this morning. First of all, let me just go back to Freddy. Really, how long you think this will go on for, or can go on for?
Good morning, Romana. Thank you for having me, and hope everybody's safe. I know that you're hearing loud blasts outside. Essentially, we are entering the phase of the war of attrition. Basically, we're still early on in the race. The Iranians are still being able to launch a widespread attacks on many countries. It's 10 countries now, including the Gulf states, U.S. regional bases, as well as Israel. So they're trying to impose heavy costs on the United States, Israel, and the Gulf, in hopes that if in a week from now they're continuing this pace of intensity, I would say, in their attacks, they could survive, and there would be some sort of a resolution that keeps them at least somewhat intact. At the same time, the Israelis, the United States, are trying as fast as possible to complete their objectives before they run out of air defense ammunitions, which is a key variable here. And at the same time, we know that the United States is certainly risk averse when it comes to American casualties abroad, especially in another Middle Eastern war. So essentially, I think that we're still in the sort of early phases of the conflict. I wouldn't say it'll last more than a couple of weeks, I would say, maximum, because we're seeing a high intensity pace of operations. But we certainly are in this attritional phase right now. Okay, you make a good point on the attritional phase. Look, it's pretty obvious, and this has emerged from the language that President Trump has used alongside the Israeli Prime Minister over the weekend, that the change of regime is one of the stated objectives. Is that even possible without the U.S. committing ground troops? Well, usually air power alone is not enough to change a regime, and we've seen past precedents with that in prior years and in past decades, so on and so forth. I can go about an hour talking about how air power alone cannot change a regime. However, they do see that there's maybe a window of opportunity that hasn't existed for the past 3 decades of the Islamic regime's existence. They see that the Islamic regime is struggling with internal dissent. They're struggling with economic mismanagement. We've seen a lot of protests, and the latest ones were one of the most intense. And they think that by striking and decapitating the Islamic regime's leadership, there may be space for the people to take the helm, so to speak, or the opposition to unify and sort of lead regime transformation, I would say, rather than change. There are a few scenarios that I can give you, Jumana, on how this is more likely to play out. The first most likely scenario is that, from what we've seen until now, hardliners are more likely to take the helm. Hardliners even more than the late Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, because we've seen some appointments like the new IRGC Commander General Vahadi, who's a known hardliner, and they're still alive, basically. The second option is that reformists, if the hardliners are decapitated moving forward in this campaign, there's a good chance, if especially people mobilize on the streets, reformists may take the helm, and those are the ones who may concede to some American demands to reach some sort of a ceasefire or a nuclear deal. And the last scenario is total collapse of governance in Iran. The opposition may be taking arms, although we haven't seen this materialize yet. But these are some of the particular scenarios that we're watching for.
Yeah, and indeed, I need to remind viewers that Ali Larijani, who is the chief of the National Security Council, just was quoted about half an hour ago saying that they do not plan on negotiating with the U.S. So that's an important point. Look, Freddie, you were speaking to us from Beirut, and again, we walked in this morning to news that there have been a series of strikes, aerial strikes from Israel into some of the suburbs of Beirut. This after Hezbollah lobbed some rockets into northern Israel. How do you read, number one, the potential for Lebanon to potentially be embroiled in this now regional war? And number two, how effective really is this firing up of proxies around the region going to be for Iran?
So I answer your second question first, because that conflict could still, the regional conflict, even though it is already in its regional phase, could still intensify when it comes to participation of both Hezbollah and the Houthis, who we haven't seen fire a rocket yet, which is, I would say, surprising. Now, in terms of what Hezbollah did and Lebanon being dragged, we're already in this because, Hezbollah seems to have wanted to strike Israel symbolically in retaliation for the killing of Khamenei. But in doing so, dragged Lebanon again, despite the domestic political constraints and risks. Strategically, I think Hezbollah had felt that the group had to do something because it's still ideologically and strategically aligned to Iran. However, with Israel's massive retaliation, now I can tell you that the group may have dragged itself in Lebanon beyond the symbolic attack and has undone a year of government attempts to control war and peace decisions. Yeah. Essentially, and now it's not up to Hezbollah to control the pace of escalation. Rather, it's Israel who's going to control the pace of escalation. And from the widespread retaliation by the Israelis that we've seen, and we know that the Israelis have been more aggressive and more risk tolerant in the past 2 years since the October 7 attack, they're not going to let this slide, unfortunately.
Freddie, thank you so much for bringing us your perspectives. Please stay safe wherever you are around Beirut. Freddy Khoueiry, Global Security Analyst, MENA at RANE. Now, global stocks are lower and crude is spiking higher as an escalation in the Middle East conflict hits markets, prompting investors to trim risk exposure. Joining us now is Deepak Mehra, Chief Economist at Commercial Bank of Dubai. Well, in the region, I was just talking about the local bourses being closed today and tomorrow. We had the Tadawul down around 2% yesterday. U.S. futures pointed to open up in the red. Would you say that the scale of the reaction so far is perhaps pretty muted in the context of how many countries are actually involved in this regional conflict now?
Good morning, Jumana. Indeed, it is. And the reason for this muted reaction this morning is, in fact, the fact that the markets have already baked in a lot of risk premium. So if you see oil, Brent is up about 25% in the last 6 weeks. Including the previous week, and gold is up 13% just in February. So the markets had already baked in a lot of risk premium, and that is why this morning you don't see such a panic in the market. So we did see oil open 13% higher, but it's now trading much, it has eased a bit from there, up about 7%. Even gold has eased. Silver is trading flat from where it was last week. We're seeing very muted reaction in U.S. Treasury yields. They're up just a few basis points because clearly if oil prices go up, there is an inflationary transmission into the economy. But we don't see that, at least not right now, in any of the asset classes. Even equity futures were down, I think, 1.5% at some stage. S&P 500 now down about 0.75, 0.8. Yes, so muted reaction so far.
Yeah, and Deepak, when you talk about the price action in oil today, yes, initially it opened up 13% higher. Now we're about 6% higher. Do you think about the knock-on effects that could have to the global economy and the potential resurgence of inflationary pressures?
Yes, Jumana, I think so. That's the key transmission, into the global economy. But over there, let's keep in mind that the oil importers, essentially emerging markets, China, India, European Union, they are most exposed, more exposed than, let's say, US is, because US, as we know, has become almost energy independent, whereas the other regions will definitely face bigger pressures. But yes, with oil prices going up, there will be inflationary pressures globally, including in the US. And if this conflict prolongs, we could have a re-acceleration of inflation in the US that then changes the dynamics for the rate cut narrative.
Okay, so then what wins out with 10-year U.S. Treasuries? Today, they are acting like a traditional safe haven tool. We're trading through 4%, below 4%, I should say. And that is because of concerns about the region. But at the same time, you talk about the potential knock-on effects to inflation. Which one wins out as far as yields are concerned?
Yes, I think there are two scenarios which are likely to play out, and that will decide what happens. One is if we have a quick resolution, some sort of a settlement of this conflict, then we go back to normal times and the yields go back, 10-year yields go back to where they were. But let's say this prolongs for long, the issue would be, one, inflationary pressures. Number two, the term premium will build into the longer-dated treasuries. There will be a fiscal impact in the U.S. of this conflict, and if that happens, then the 10-year treasury yields could be heading much higher due to all these factors: inflationary, term premium, fiscal, and so on. So, and if that would then translate to a risk-off environment in equities and in general. So we have to see how this plays out, which of the two scenarios plays out.
Yeah. Deepak, really good to have you with us. Deepak Mehra, Chief Economist at Commercial Bank of Dubai. Thank you. Well, as you were just speaking about, oil prices surged by the most in 4 years before pairing gains as traders assess the effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz as triggered by the U.S.-Israeli war against Iran. For more, I'm now joined by Anthony DePaula, Bloomberg Middle East energy reporter, and Ziad Dawood, Bloomberg Economics Chief EM economist. Anthony, I'm going to start with you. There was so much confusion over the weekend as to exactly what was happening on the Strait of Hormuz and whether the Iranians had forcefully closed it down or whether tankers were just avoiding it. Just walk us through the state of play right now.
Yeah, Joanna, thanks. In fact, it really doesn't matter whether it's fully closed or partially closed if there is that confusion, because as we've seen, tankers have been avoiding it. And so that's kind of the impact, really. But just to answer your question a little bit more directly, yes, there were some reports that vessels were hearing warnings. This was already on Saturday that the Iranian IRGC Navy had closed the Strait of Hormuz and that the vessels should not pass through. Vessels had already been warned by U.S. military vessels to keep distance, stay away. The Iranians came out yesterday saying that they didn't plan to close the Strait of Hormuz. However, at the same time, we had 3 vessels just outside Hormuz, which were hit by missiles, projectiles, just outside of Hormuz. So what we've been seeing is that traffic has flowed to a trickle. So effectively, vessels are not going through there. So that's what I mean, that it's the same thing. It's an effective closure, whereas the vessels are holding, waiting to see what's going on. We've seen some turnaround as they approached it and waited inside the Persian Gulf.
Yeah. Okay, so Ziad, let me turn to you. Anthony's basically saying it doesn't really matter whether it's a formal or an effective closure, because essentially tankers are avoiding the Strait. I know you look at various scenario analyses. Oil is up now net 6%. Under what scenario are we going to see a bigger spike in oil?
I think we need to go beyond the sort of the psychological and the expectation of disruption in oil into physical disruption of oil. And that could take 3 forms, Jumana. That could take either the form of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, which is the most extreme, because you lose 20% of global oil supplies. And if that happens for an extended period of time, that will have a serious impact on oil prices and the global economy. The second condition for oil to spike significantly is attack on oil tankers, more widespread attacks on oil tankers. And the third one is attack on oil infrastructure in the region, whether it's in Iran or neighboring countries, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the UAE, Qatar, and so on. So I think if you have any of these conditions where it results in physical disruption, you could see a serious spike in oil prices.
Yeah, Anthony, let me come back to you on this. We also had that OPEC Plus meeting yesterday that they decided to put back a little bit more than 200,000 barrels a day. Talk us through whether this was a surprise to the market and whether it does anything to sort of soak up some of the concerns about a tightening of supply that could ensue on back of what's happening around the Persian Gulf.
Yeah, Jumana, I mean, I think that's the lens to look at that through, is that is an effort to kind of calm nerves, to say that we can put some more oil on the market. So it was bigger than expected. It was about 50% bigger than the cuts that they, than the increases that they had been making through December. So there is that additional oil on the market. We are also looking for Saudi Arabia's official oil selling prices for the month of April, which should come out this week, and we'll see if they send any signal there. Those Saudi official oil prices are set to increase, actually, just because of the fundamentals of the market, because that Middle Eastern crude oil it has been in such demand. It's actually been pricing more cheaply than European crude up until now. So we'll see if the actual physical situation on the ground changes those things. Like Ziad said, it's really the impact on production and the physical movement of oil that's really going to spike things further. What we've been hearing from some of the traders at the moment is that because there's still that trickle coming through, because there's not been a tax on infrastructure or actual tankers, there's still that kind of wait and see option, whereas if we see stuff really get hit, that's when traders get really nervous.
Yeah. Bloomberg's Anthony DePaula and Ziad Dawood, Bloomberg Economics Chief Emerging Markets Economist. Thank you so much. Well, coming up, we'll speak with Sara Vakhshouri, President and founder of SVB Energy International, about her views on what might happen with the energy market. We're also going to do a deeper dive into what happens next within Iran. This is Bloomberg. Good morning. This is Horizon's Middle East and Africa. Our top stories this morning. Turmoil in the Middle East. U.S. President Donald Trump says the bombing campaign against Iran will continue until its objectives are achieved, calling on the nation's leaders to capitulate. Iran faces a leadership vacuum after the killing of its supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, with an interim council taking over and the constitutional succession thrown into doubt. And all eyes on Hormuz. Oil spikes as the widening Iran crisis effectively shuts the crucial strait, sending Brent up as much as 13% at one point, in the biggest jump in 4 years. Well, it's just gone 9:30 a.m. across the Emirates. I'm Jumana Bersachi, live from Dubai, and really stunning developments this weekend in the region, here in the UAE and across many Gulf nations as well, with many of the financial capitals getting subjected to a barrage of missiles and drones that have been intercepted. So this is very much expanded into a regional conflict over the course of the last 48 hours. Let me take you to markets now and just show you some of the price action that we're seeing in key financial indicators. S&P futures pointed to open up down in the red this morning, down about 0.9%. This after a negative close for Wall Street. And remember, even the setup into this weekend, we had some jitters on Wall Street around AI, around the possibility of a more hawkish Fed. And then you just add to the mix what has happened in the Middle East region over the weekend. And what you're seeing is a flight to quality. 10-year yields in the U.S. sitting at 3.96. I don't have dollar up here, but dollar also saw a bid overnight as well. And then gold, too, up 1.4%. Oil, a lot of focus on the impact the lower volume of shipments going through the Strait of Hormuz is having on the oil complex. And today we have opened up almost, we opened up at 1.13% higher. We pull back now. We're about 6.5% higher. But Brent sitting at $77. So a substantial impact on where the price of oil is trading and on energy markets as a whole. The big question is whether this actually holds up. We have a guest to talk about it shortly. And then switching over, just a reminder to viewers that because of the situation, the Capital Markets Authority over here in the UAE announced that Dubai and Abu Dhabi bourses will be closed today and tomorrow, but the Tadawul in Saudi Arabia was open yesterday. You can see it opened sharply down, ended the session around 2% lower. One of the bright spots on the index was Aramco, obviously, given the knock-on effects from energy and the price in oil, the upwards price in oil. Aramco closed the day up 3%, despite the Tadawul ending 2% lower. Now let's turn back to what happens next. Following the death of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Iran has entered something of a, quote, survival mode, governed by a temporary council, while the powerful Revolutionary Guard seeks to tighten its control. Khamenei's demise marks the end of an era for Iranians. The majority have only known one leader, but his death also has potentially seismic consequences for the Middle East and beyond. For more, let's talk to Patrick Sykes, our Middle East breaking news editor. I guess the question becomes, with the Ayatollah gone, as well as some of his senior advisors, the commander-in-chief of the IRGC, who effectively is in command right now?
So as of right now, the Iranians are keen to say that everything's proceeding kind of in line with the constitution. That means there's a three-person temporary council running Iran in the Supreme Leader's absence. That consists of the president, Pezeshkian, the head of the judiciary, Ejei, and just appointed yesterday another cleric, a senior cleric, Ayatollah Arefi, who became the third and final member of that council. They are to run the country until the appointment of a new Supreme Leader, and that's why I think attention now will be pointing to when will the so-called Assembly of Experts, the council responsible for doing that, when will they convene? Can they even convene in a time of war? And then, of course, who among all those senior clerics in Iran might they pick to succeed Khamenei? Remember, this is only something the Islamic Republic has done once before in its history, so it's relatively untested waters.
Yeah, and it was for Khamenei himself. At the same time, President Trump calling on the people to take to the streets, the Iranian people to take to the streets. The Israeli Prime Minister also saying the same and saying that this is a time for the Iranians to take their fate into their own hands. How likely is it that people are going to show up in force?
Yeah, I think that's a really key variable in terms of on the ground, because we know that the US isn't keen to get involved on the ground itself. For now, I think it still feels like a very active combat situation. I think for that reason, many won't be answering that call for now. Another voice that might add to that chorus of calls for Iranians to rise up would be the exiled son of the last Shah, Reza Pahlavi, in the US, who kind of emerged as a popular opposition figure, particularly in the December-January protests. Whether or not he adds to those calls, and again, whether they are answered on the street, will be another key variable. For now, what we've seen is more kind of footage of Iranians, shouting support from their balconies, some footage of people celebrating in the streets over Khamenei's death, but not the kind of taking over of institutions that Trump and Israel is calling for, and that perhaps longer term is what would be needed to kind of turn this into a revolution.
This is a very important point that you just made, given all of the conversation around Iranian regime change and the fact that it has to come organically. Patrick, thank you so much. Patrick Sykes, our Middle East breaking news editor. Well, let's talk about energy markets. Again, oil prices are spiking after the widening conflict with Iran disrupted traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, a critical choke point that handles roughly a fifth of the world's oil supply. Brent crude surged to its highest level in more than a year as tanker movements through the waterway largely halted, sending shockwaves through global energy markets. Joining us now is Sara Vakhshouri, president and founder at SVB Energy International. So, Sara, we had that initial spike of up 13%. We've now pulled back. We're only up around, well, still up around 6.5%. What do you make of the price action so far?
Well, it's naturally that natural that the market was calm before the weekend, and then during the weekend, all these geopolitical headlines and shocks have been built up. So definitely, the market would open at higher risk premium. The traders would open it at a higher risk that has been built to catch up with the events during the weekend, and this has been a significant event. Since in the past few years that market has been seen. But something that is important is that market has adjusted itself, and something that we have to bear in mind is that something that is different this time from 1970s, let's say, is that most of the trades in the paper market are done by algorithms, and our algorithms are very quick to adjust the prices and risk premiums within hours rather than previously within days or weeks. So we see that price adjustment and risk premium adjustment happening much faster with the algorithm pricing, and the machines are faster.
Interesting. Sarah, do you see prices holding up at these levels, i.e. this price shock that we got to oil? Is it likely to be sustained over the foreseeable future?
So as of now that the market has opened, we don't have any missing barrels, which means there hasn't been any physical disruption of the barrels. There hasn't been actual closure of the Strait of Hormuz or attack on the infrastructure, oil infrastructure. However, definitely the market perceives a threat of flow. There is three main threats on the barrels. The most significant ones is the flow of oil through the Strait of Hormuz, the corridor, because most of the oil, 20 million barrels per day of the seaborne oil from the region passes through this strait. So that's the largest. And then also the threat of attack on physical energy infrastructure in the region. However, that threat has not been materialized yet. Nevertheless, we see that already the tanker movements in the Strait of Hormuz has been significantly reduced due to the significantly increased insurance. Tankers, many of them are not willing to go through this corridor. The rates of shipping has already been increased, a lot of rerouting. And so far, really, we could say a lot of Chinese tankers are moving. So something that the market perceives is that usually it doesn't feel rational for Iran to close the Strait of Hormuz because they have the import of the crucial goods like crucial food for them. It also spikes significant retaliatory attacks on its infrastructure. But also, majority of this oil goes to China and India, so would turn them against the country.
Yeah. Sarah, I don't know if you had the chance to read a column that Bloomberg opinion columnist Javier Blas put up yesterday, and I thought he made a very, very salient point, and that this time around, the capacity of the world to absorb an oil shock emanating from the region is a lot higher, namely because of the shale revolution in the U.S. and the fact that shale really has changed the nature of the industry. The U.S. are a lot less dependent on the supply of OPEC oil than they have been in the past. Do you think that, to a certain extent, is cushioning the extent of the price reaction that we're getting today in oil?
Of course, because we have a significant oil exports that going from different locations doesn't pass through this Strait of Hormuz. So we have a diversity of supply. But something else that is very important is that China's demand and the stockpile that China built. At this time, perhaps one of the reasons that prices adjusted to kind of a lower risk premium from the opening of the market is that we have plenty of inventories around the world. If we think about the attack on Saudi facilities back in 2019, Saudi Arabia was able, even though that has been its facilities has been under attack, has been able to during the month that they were repairing the facilities to continuously supply their customers through the inventories and the storages that they built around the world. But also we have OECD inventories. We have strategic petroleum reserves. We have commercial reserves. But thinking about China, a lot of part of that Chinese import today is for stockpile, which they can afford and not importing that much that level, but also they have already built a huge stockpile in the past couple of years. So China has the ability that its inventories, both the commercial, strategic, and also the teapot refineries, to absorb a shock if it's, let's say, a week or two of closure of Strait of Hormuz in terms of the import from China. However, Asia and Asian market are going to bear this risk higher because the shale oil has a different quality from the oil that is exported from the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah. Very salient point. Sara Vakhshouri, president and founder of SVB Energy International, thank you so much for joining us today. Well, coming up, travel chaos ripples across Middle East, Asia and beyond as the Iranian conflict shuts key airports in the region. We'll bring you the latest next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Jumana Bersachi in Dubai. Well, travel chaos is extending through the Middle East and beyond as carriers across the Persian Gulf continue blanket flight suspensions, causing major disruptions at some of the world's busiest airports. For more, we're now joined by Bloomberg's Europe and Middle East aerospace reporter, Leen Al-Rashdan. Leen, just walk us through now the current situation at the airports as it pertains to operations and also some of the decisions that these airlines have taken over the course of the weekend.
So this is our third day of full suspensions. This is unprecedented. You're talking about the world's largest airlines, some of the world's busiest hubs. They really had no other choice. I mean, the airspace is closed. You can't really fly out, fly in. They're having to deal with tens of thousands of travelers who are stranded in Qatar, in Kuwait, in Bahrain, and obviously in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. The largest being in Dubai because we have that massive number of tourists. They're also having to deal with their airports being hit. I mean, they had to evacuate the airport. Kuwait, Bahrain, Dubai were also hit, and Abu Dhabi, someone died in that airport because of the strikes.
So are those airports non-operational as we speak right now?
Completely shut down.
Okay. Do we have any visibility on when airspace and air travel will resume, or is it too early to say?
It might be too early to say. Etihad has said that they're suspended till 2 p.m. today. Emirates till 3 p.m. today, local. Qatar Airways indefinitely. But they've been saying this for the past few days. They're hopeful that airspace will open back up at this time, but it's not guaranteed, and they're likely to just extend.
What has been the impact on, well, these stocks? Obviously, some are private, and anyway, the local bourses are not open, but the reverberations on other airlines around the world that would traditionally be passing through Dubai, what has the knock-on effect been this morning?
Well, it could be positive or it could be negative. If you show that some of the Middle East airlines, which are more in demand than anywhere else, you could make a case that some people should start traveling more with Asian carriers like Cathay or Singapore. But, you know, they opened it today, they opened as much as 10% lower. It's not really good for anyone in the industry if this area shuts its airspace. It means more fuel burn. It means harder logistics. So it's going to have a severe impact on the airlines here and some sort of impact on airlines globally.
Yeah, and reports over the weekend that the UK is looking to evacuate some of their nationals who got stranded here too. So looking for alternative means of leaving the country. Leen Al-Rashdan, thank you so much. Well, Al Jazeera is reporting blasts and sirens have been heard in Kuwait. The Arab nation has also experienced power cuts in some areas due to falling debris from drone interceptions. Meanwhile, the country announced a freeze on all food prices and imposed an export ban to stabilize markets as it deals with the strikes from Iran. Iraq says it has enough grain reserves to last a full year and food supplies for more than 6 months. In a statement, the Trade Ministry says they have taken all necessary precautions to deal with any economic repercussions from the security developments in the region. A foreign worker has died in Bahrain after a fire broke out on a ship in Bahrain due to falling debris from an intercepted missile. Authorities say 2 others were wounded and the fire extinguished in Salman Industrial City. Coming up, the UAE has branded itself a safe financial hub insulated from regional volatility, but Iranian missile and drone strikes have forced traders and institutions to review their working arrangements. We'll have more on that story next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Jumana Bersachi in Dubai. The United Arab Emirates has long branded itself a safe financial hub insulated from regional volatility. But Iranian missile and drone strikes have forced traders and institutions to review their working arrangements. For more, let's talk to Alex Duller, our money and power reporter, who is in Abu Dhabi. Alex, talk us through the contingencies the traders and Wall Street executives have now put in place given the events over the weekend.
Yeah, so several hedge funds have begun reviewing business continuity arrangements immediately in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. And according to a story that we had out, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Citigroup, and Nomura have instructed all their employees to work from home in the region. And staff at Diamond Asia, the hedge fund, have been putting together contingency plans. And they have around 17 staff in DIFC and a few more that were stuck in layovers. So a lot of these financial institutions are putting together contingency plans at this time.
And you know, the UAE has not only cultivated an image, but worked very hard to build a stable financial ecosystem that would allow for these asset managers and hedge funds to thrive. Is there a concern that the events over the course of the last couple of days could dent the UAE's reputation for being, quote unquote, a safe haven within the region?
I think so, definitely. I think the UAE has always had this reputation as being quite insulated and quite stable in the region. And I think, given the events of the past 24 to 48 hours, I think it's definitely made people at least starting to ask questions. And I think we'll definitely be watching it as it unfolds in the next few days and weeks. And I think we'll have a much better idea going forward as to how stable the region is.
Yeah, Alex, thank you so much. Alex Duller, our money and power reporter. And of course, as you've been speaking, we talk about the ongoing sounds of explosions that we've been hearing in Dubai, also in Abu Dhabi, that just happened in the last 45 minutes. But then we're also getting some figures on the latest Israeli strikes that took place on Lebanon. The southern suburbs of Beirut have been hit overnight, this in retaliation to rockets that Hezbollah fired into northern Israel. Israeli strikes on Lebanon kill 31 and wound 149. This is the latest figures that have come through from the AFP. So just tallying the numbers, the death count, and the rising number of casualties from the latest round and also the latest front that has opened up. Because so far, for the first 48 hours of this conflict, Lebanon was not involved, but that has changed throughout the course of this morning. So those Israeli strikes on Lebanon have killed 31 and wounded 149. Well, Bloomberg has learned that Egypt is reshuffling its LNG needs after Israel closed gas fields following the Iran strikes. The state buyer, Egyptian Natural Gas Company, will bring forward 3 cargoes a month starting in March and issue a purchase tender to buy between 19 and 21 extra cargoes for June to September during peak consumption. Egypt typically receives about 1 billion cubic feet of gas per day via a pipeline from Israel. A man and his 3 daughters were wounded in Syria by falling missile debris from the fire exchange between Iran and Israel. Israel intercepted several Iranian missiles over Syria, causing loud explosions, which were heard in the capital, Damascus. Syria has also closed its airspace until Tuesday, following the U.S.-Israel attack on Iran and retaliation from Tehran on Gulf nations. President Ahmed al-Sharia has condemned the attacks on Arab states. And a programming note for you, the JP Morgan CEO, Jamie Dimon, will be speaking to Bloomberg surveillance anchor Lisa Abramovich. That is later today. Do not miss that conversation. That is taking place at 2 p.m. New York time. That is 11 p.m. across the Emirates. Now let's round up the show taking a look at the market reaction to the developments in the region. And just in the last couple of minutes, S&P futures have turned more negative, more in the red now, down 1%, NASDAQ down 1.2%. European markets seen opening substantially lower, down 1.8%. And of course, let's turn to the price action in oil. All eyes were on oil at the open yesterday. We initially spiked up 13%. We've now pulled back, but clearly there is concern that if we're looking at a protracted state of conflict or sustained closure or reduced traffic around Strait of Hormuz, then these levels could hold up or potentially move even higher, especially if there's a physical hit to oil supplies. So Brent sitting just shy of $78 as we head into the European session. That's it for Horizons Middle East. I'm Jumana Persacci in Dubai. Stay with us for Daybreak Europe. This is Bloomberg.